Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. Imagine your new, wealthy neighbor secretly lists your private fishing dock on rental apps, making cash off your property. When you confront her, she sends a lawyer's letter demanding you secure your dock properly. She thought it was a threat, but it was the exact permission I needed to ruin her entire scheme. I've lived on this small lake my entire adult life. It's not much, maybe 5 acres of water surrounded by thick woods and a handful of properties. When I bought my place here over 2 decades back, it was mostly because of the fishing. I'm not talking trophy bass or anything fancy, but there's something peaceful about casting a line early in the morning when the mist is still hanging over the water. The property came with a decent-sized dock that the previous owner had built. Over the years, I expanded it, adding a covered section and some benches. I even put in a small cleaning station for gutting fish. It became my favorite spot on the entire property. For most of those years, I had great neighbors. The couple to my left kept to themselves, but were always friendly when we crossed paths. The family to my right had kids who occasionally asked permission to fish off my dock, which I never minded. They were respectful, cleaned up after themselves, and usually brought me some of whatever their mom was baking that week as a thank you. Then a few years back, the property on my right sold. The family had moved out of state for work, and their house sat empty for a few months before finally getting scooped up. I didn't think much of it at first. New neighbors come and go, and I figured I'd introduce myself eventually. My new neighbor turned out to be a woman in her 40s who had apparently made a fortune in some kind of consulting business. She drove a luxury car that seemed impractical for our gravel roads, wore designer clothes even when checking her mailbox, and made it clear from day one that she was used to getting what she wanted. Our first interaction happened about a week after she moved in. I was on my dock, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise. She came walking down from her property, navigating the path in heels that kept sinking into the soft earth. She called out asking if this was my dock. I confirmed it was. She looked it over, then mentioned she was disappointed her property didn't come with lake access. She said the listing had been misleading about that. I nodded sympathetically but didn't say much. It wasn't my problem that she hadn't done her research before buying. Then she asked if she could use my dock sometimes. Maybe do some yoga out here in the mornings or bring friends down for wine in the evenings. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to be neighborly, but I also valued my privacy. This was my space, my investment, and I didn't know this person at all. I told her I'd prefer to keep it private, but thanked her for asking. Her expression shifted immediately. The friendly veneer dropped, replaced by something cold. She said she thought neighbors were supposed to help each other out, that it seemed selfish to have this whole dock to myself when she had no water access at all. I stood my ground. I explained that I'd built and maintained this dock myself, and it was on my property. I wasn't trying to be difficult, but I liked my solitude out here. She left in a huff, and I figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing people on my dock, not my neighbor herself, but strangers. At first, it was just 1 or 2 people, usually in the early evening. They'd be sitting on my benches, sometimes with fishing rods, sometimes just taking photos. The first time I confronted someone, they seemed genuinely confused. A middle-aged guy told me he'd paid for a fishing spot through some app and was given this location. He showed me his phone. There was a listing for waterfront fishing access with photos of my dock. I was stunned. I told him this was private property and he needed to leave immediately. He got defensive, saying he'd paid good money, and if this was private property, why was it listed for rent? I had to practically escort him off my land while he complained about leaving a negative review. I immediately called my neighbor. She picked up on the 4th ring and acted surprised when I explained what had happened. She claimed she had no idea what I was talking about, suggested maybe someone was using my dock without permission, and said I should probably post some signs, but I knew. The photos in that listing were taken from her property line. You could see the angle. They were shot from where her yard met the woods that separated our lots. She was the only one who could have taken them. I started doing research. Turns out she'd listed my dock on 3 different rental platforms. Peaceful waterfront fishing experience, private lake access for recreation, and scenic waterfront photography location. She was charging between $30 and $50 per visit depending on the platform and duration. I documented everything, screenshots of the listings, photos of the people showing up, even a log of dates and times. Then I had a security camera installed at the entrance to my dock with a clear private property, no trespassing sign. When I called her again with this evidence, she finally dropped the act. She said she was just trying to make use of a resource that was going to waste anyway, that I was being unreasonable by hoarding lake access when I barely used it myself. She actually tried to negotiate, offered me 20% of the rental income if I'd let her continue. I told her to take down the listings immediately or I'd take legal action. She laughed and said I was overreacting. That I should be grateful she was even offering me a cut. About a week after that phone call, I got a certified letter from her lawyer. It was remarkably petty for something on legal letterhead. The core of it was this. She claimed that since I'd never posted adequate no trespassing signage or formally restricted access, I had created an attractive nuisance and people had a reasonable expectation that they could use it. The letter demanded that I properly secure and mark my property if I wanted to restrict access. It specifically stated I needed to take all necessary and reasonable measures to prevent unauthorized public use, and that until I did so she would continue operating her rental business since I hadn't adequately established the space as restricted private property. I read this thing 3 times. The whole tone was condescending, like they were educating me on property law. The last paragraph basically said that if I wanted to be taken seriously about keeping people off my dock, I needed to make it obvious and secure it properly. I called my lawyer and read him the letter. He was quiet for a moment, then started laughing. He said it was complete nonsense legally. The property records and 1 sign would be more than enough. But then he said something that made me grin. If I wanted to make their lives difficult, I should absolutely follow their advice to the letter. Every single word of it. So I did. I started with signs. Not just 1 or 2 no trespassing signs. I put up 18 of them, every 8 to 10 feet around the entire dock perimeter. Big, bright yellow signs with red lettering that read, "Private property, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted, owner will press charges." Then I called a fencing company, got quotes for a chain link fence, not around my entire property, that would have been expensive and unnecessary. Just around the dock and the immediate area, 7 feet high, commercial grade with a locking gate. I even added those rotating barrier things on top that make it harder to climb, though that was probably overkill. But here's where it got good. When the survey crew came out to mark where the fence would go, we discovered something interesting. That decorative stone pathway my neighbor had laid down to make it easier for her rental customers to access my dock, she'd built it partially on my property, not by much, maybe 2 or 3 feet, but it was definitely over the line. My fence went right through it, cut that pathway in half. The half on her side was useless because it didn't connect to anything anymore. The fence installation took 3 days. The crew did a solid job. When they finished, my dock looked like it was protecting something a lot more valuable than a few fishing spots and some benches. It looked serious, but I wasn't done. The letter had said all necessary and reasonable measures, so I kept going. I installed motion sensor lights, 4 of them, bright as stadium lights, positioned to cover every angle of the dock area. They were triggered by any movement within 30 feet, including movement from her yard, since the dock was close enough to the property line. I also hired a security company, not for regular patrols, that would have been too expensive, but they installed a proper alarm system connected to the fence gate. If anyone tampered with it, opened it without the code, or tried to climb over, it would trigger an alarm loud enough to hear from 100 yards away and automatically notify the sheriff's department as a trespassing incident in progress. The whole setup, fence, lights, alarm system, signs, cost me just over $4 grand, worth every penny. Within 2 days of the fence going up, my neighbor called. She was furious. The fence was an eyesore. The lights were shining into her windows at night every time an animal walked by. I was being completely unreasonable and destroying the natural beauty of the area. I let her finish her rant, then calmly reminded her that her lawyer had specifically told me to properly secure and mark my property and take all necessary and reasonable measures to prevent unauthorized public use. I was simply following their legal advice to the letter. She sputtered something about how this wasn't what they meant, and I should have known they were talking about a simple sign or 2. I told her that as a non-lawyer, I felt it was important to take legal advice very seriously and implement it thoroughly. If her attorney felt I was being too comprehensive in following their instructions, perhaps they should have been more specific in their letter. Maybe they should have defined what they meant by all necessary measures. There was silence on the line, then she hung up on me. The fence stayed up, the lights kept triggering, and the best part, her rental customers kept showing up anyway for another few weeks, despite her scrambling to take down the online listings. See, some people had booked in advance, and she'd already taken their money. These people would show up, see the fortress I'd built around my dock, read the 18 threatening signs, and leave confused. Several of them figured out which house was hers and knocked on her door demanding explanations and refunds. I watched one of these interactions from my kitchen window. A couple in their 30s were at her front door, the guy waving his phone around. My neighbor was trying to explain something, but they weren't having it. They left shaking their heads, and I later found out they'd left a blistering review on one of the platforms before her account got suspended. The motion sensor lights were their own special kind of perfect. They went off constantly. Deer, raccoons, possums, even large birds would trigger them. Every time they clicked on, they were bright enough to light up half her backyard and definitely shined into her bedroom window on the side of her house facing my property. She called the sheriff twice to complain about the lights. The first deputy who showed up walked around, looked at my setup, checked where the lights were positioned, and told her that since they were on my property, pointing at my property, there was nothing he could do. The second deputy, who came out a week later for her follow-up complaint, actually complimented my security setup and asked where I'd gotten the system installed. Around this time, I started filing my own complaints. I contacted the rental platforms she was using and provided detailed documentation that she was listing property she didn't own and didn't have permission to use. I included screenshots of the listings, photos proving it was my dock, property records showing ownership, and copies of the police reports from trespassers I'd had removed. 2 of the platforms suspended her accounts after about a week of back and forth. They asked for documentation, I provided it, they investigated, and they shut her down. The third platform took almost 3 weeks, but eventually did the same. I also documented everything for potential future tax reporting requirements. My lawyer mentioned that if she was running this as a business through an LLC but not reporting the income, that could become its own problem for her down the road. I didn't file any reports myself, that wasn't my place, but we kept detailed records just in case it became relevant later. Then I got a letter from her lawyer again. This one was full of threats about how I was interfering with her business and creating a hostile environment. They demanded I remove the fence and lights immediately and stop filing complaints with the rental platforms. My lawyer responded with our own letter. We included property surveys, photographs, and evidence of her fraudulent listings. We outlined the various laws she'd broken and suggested that if she wanted to pursue legal action against me for following her lawyer's own advice, we'd be happy to countersue. We also pointed out that continuing to rent out property she didn't own, despite being informed of her trespassing, could move this from civil to criminal territory. Her lawyer went quiet after that. But my neighbor wasn't done trying to cause problems. She started filing complaints with the county about my property, claimed my dock was built without proper permits. I had to dig up paperwork from 20 years ago proving it was permitted and inspected. She said I was creating a public nuisance by restricting access to the lake. The county confirmed the lake wasn't public property, and even if it were, that didn't give anyone rights to cross my land. She even tried to argue there was an old easement giving her property water access through my land. The title search I'd done when buying proved that was false. Every complaint meant time gathering documentation and responding. Every false claim meant phone calls with county officials. It was harassment, but it was just barely legal enough that there wasn't much I could do except keep responding with facts. Then I had an idea. I went back through all the records I'd collected. I had dates when people had shown up at my dock, I had the rental listings with their rates, I cross-referenced my security camera footage with the booking calendars I'd screenshotted before the listings were taken down. I did the math and figured she'd probably made somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000 before I got everything shut down. That money was generated using my property without my permission. I met with my lawyer and showed him everything. He looked it over and suggested filing for what he called unjust enrichment. Basically, it's this legal concept where if someone makes money using your stuff without permission, you're entitled to the profits they made. It's different from regular trespassing damages because we weren't just saying she wronged me, we were saying she owed me the actual money she'd earned from my property. We filed the claim along with trespassing damages. The trespassing part was more symbolic, but the unjust enrichment claim was going after that rental income. The case took a few months to move through the system. During that time, my neighbor largely avoided me, though I'd occasionally see her glaring from her windows when I was out on the dock. Something else happened that helped my case. The county, after reviewing her various complaints against me, had done their own investigation into whether she was filing these in good faith. When they found that several complaints were provably false, like the easement claim and the permit issue, they noted it in their records. This established a pattern of malicious behavior that my lawyer said would strengthen our position. During the settlement discussions, my lawyer mentioned that the rental platforms had apparently found other complaints about her listings in her previous city. I don't know all the details, but it seemed like this wasn't the first time she'd tried something like this. One platform was apparently considering their own legal action against her for fraud. Suddenly, my case wasn't her biggest legal problem. Her lawyer contacted mine and said she was willing to settle. I wanted to push for trial initially. I wanted a judgment on the record. But my lawyer pointed out that settlements can be structured in creative ways, and we could get things a court might not order. We went back with our demands. First, she would pay me the estimated rental income she'd collected. Based on the bookings I could document and the rates she'd charged, we calculated $4,000. Second, she would pay for a professional survey to confirm the property boundaries and install permanent markers. Third, she would sign an agreement acknowledging that she had no rights to my dock or any other part of my property, and that any future trespassing would result in immediate legal action with no warning. The fourth part was what really mattered to me. She would write a formal letter acknowledging her fraudulent listings and her harassment campaign through false county complaints. This letter would be filed with the county as part of the public record, attached to both our property files. She tried to push back on that last part, but my lawyer pointed out her alternative was going to trial, where everything would come out anyway, plus she'd be dealing with the platform lawsuits and potential tax issues. She signed the settlement agreement. The check arrived about 2 weeks later, $4,000 made out to me. The memo line just said, "per settlement agreement." Typical lawyer language that didn't admit anything specific. I took a photo of it first, which I got printed and framed. That picture still hangs in my workshop. The survey was completed a month after that. It confirmed exactly what I already knew. The property line was right where it had always been, but now it was marked with permanent orange stakes at each boundary point that nobody could dispute. The acknowledgement letter was filed with the county clerk's office. It was brief but clear. She acknowledged creating false rental listings for property she didn't own, collecting money from customers, and filing baseless complaints with the county in retaliation when I stopped her scheme. It became part of the public record. A couple months after everything was finalized, I saw a for sale sign go up in her yard. Through the grapevine, well, actually through the couple who lived on the other side of me, I heard she was having financial trouble. The platform lawsuits had gotten expensive, apparently, and she couldn't keep up with her mortgage. I never spoke to her again after the settlement. I'd see her occasionally from a distance, but we never exchanged words. The house sold within a few months to a retired couple who keep to themselves and wave when they see me on the dock. They've never once asked to use it, which I appreciate. I eventually took down most of the fence. Kept the gate and about 20 feet of fencing right at the dock entrance along with a couple of the signs. The motion sensor lights I kept too, though I adjusted them so they're not quite so sensitive. They're still useful for security without being obnoxious. The security system is still active. Probably overkill at this point, but I've kept it. It gives me peace of mind. These days, I'm back to my peaceful mornings on the water. The fish are still biting, the coffee still tastes good, and the dock is exactly as quiet and private as I always wanted it to be. The whole experience taught me something about standing your ground. When someone tries to take advantage of you, especially when they're arrogant about it, sometimes the best response isn't to get angry or emotional. It's to be methodical, document everything, understand your rights, get professional help. And if they're stupid enough to put their demands in writing, follow those demands exactly and watch it backfire. My neighbor thought she could bully me into giving her what she wanted. When that didn't work, she thought she could just take it and I wouldn't do anything. When I pushed back, she thought she could intimidate me with lawyer letters. That last one was her biggest mistake. Her lawyer's letter gave me the perfect excuse to go overboard in the most legally defensible way possible. She basically wrote me permission to build a fortress around my dock and call it following their advice. Every time I sit out here now, especially on warm evenings when I'm using the new rod and reel I bought with some of that settlement money, I think about how it all played out. She could have just accepted no as an answer. She could have used the public boat launch 2 miles down the road. She could have tried to negotiate something reasonable. Instead, she decided to steal, then doubled down when caught, then tried to legally intimidate me into backing off. Each escalation made things worse for her. I'm not a lawyer or a businessman or someone with unlimited resources. I'm just a guy who wanted to fish on his own dock in peace. But I was willing to stand up for myself. I documented everything, and I got proper legal help when needed. That made all the difference. The dock is still here. I'm still here. She's gone. And every time someone asks me about those orange survey markers along my property line or why I have a security gate on my dock, I get to tell them this story. It's become my favorite fishing story to tell, and the best part is I don't have to exaggerate a single detail. The next one is a pro-revenge story. When our first child was born, my ex forced me to quit my job. When our second child was 2, I found out about his affair. By then, he was extremely verbally, emotionally, and sometimes physically abusive. When he abused our firstborn, I put him out. That was in 2012. I couldn't afford daycare to work and had no family support. He refused to give me any money to take care of the kids, saying, "The courts haven't ordered me to give you a dime." He lied to the bank and had my accounts frozen and even assaulted me when I filed for default in the divorce. The judge finally ordered him to pay child and spousal support 6 months after I kicked him out. It was $25 and $62 a month. He refused to pay it until the garnishment kicked in, and by then he was $6K behind in support. I used that to get permission to move away. I remarried a year after the divorce. I checked the court docs, and there was a little box that said spousal support stopped upon remarriage if that box was checked. It wasn't checked, so I figured I was good. Instead of filing for his retirement, I just took that year of spousal support, $12K, and left it alone. Spousal support was only ordered for 2 years. In 2017, he filed for sole custody of the kids out of nowhere. That was when he found out I had remarried and he had paid spousal support to me during the first year of my marriage. I told him I took that money instead of filing for my share of his retirement. I said if he let me keep that $12K, I wouldn't file to split his 401K. He demanded that I repay the spousal support. The judge ordered me to repay it, but increased child support and deducted the repayment from that. It ended up that I got an extra $20 a month and he repaid himself. He dropped his bid for custody in exchange for 2 extra weeks in summer. I pursued the retirement account split. He refused to cooperate and dragged it out for 4 years. It was so bad, they sanctioned him and he had to pay me $600 a month for a year in addition to child support. They also charged him with contempt. In Jan 2021, he proposed to his girlfriend. In May of 2021, I finally got the disbursement from his 401K. I won't say how much it was, but it was about 4 times the amount of spousal support overpayment. I had no idea it would be that much. I had thought it would be around $12K, which is why I thought keeping that year of spousal and not filing for his retirement account was a fair trade. Had he not tried to take the kids from me, I never would have filed to split the account. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. His fiancée emailed me recently and told me it is my fault he won't marry her because I cleaned out his retirement account. She said I shouldn't have stolen his money. I told her that I gave him the option to let me keep that year of spousal support or take it back and I could file for his retirement. He chose to have me file for his retirement. I told her that if he really wanted to marry her and protect his assets, they could get a prenup so he wouldn't have to worry about it. She said she shouldn't have to sign a prenup because I robbed him. I never asked to be financially dependent on him. He clearly indicated he wanted a court order to take care of his kids, so I got him one. I tried to be fair and take the lesser amount by taking the spousal support and not filing for his retirement. He wouldn't let me. In summary, my ex refused to pay me until support orders dropped, refused to pay until they revoked his license. Tried to get me in trouble for accepting spousal support over payment, and in the end it cost him a lot of money out of his 401K. The next one is a malicious compliance story. One of my early jobs was in the screen department of a CRT factory. Here, various chemical mixes were dribbled, sprayed, or poured into a screen, the front 4 inches of a glass picture tube, sloshed, spun, or otherwise spread, then the excess was dumped or spun out and collected to be reclaimed, adjusted, and reused for the next batch. For one chemical, the official process was to top it off with new, mix it for 20 minutes, then if needed adjust based on the viscosity measurement you just took. After every adjustment, another 20 minutes of mixing before measuring again. This needed to be done before the previous batch ran out. We quickly learned that extra water was always needed, and you could fairly easily predict the size of the adjustment before measuring anything based on the pencil and paper graph of previous test results. Our procedure became top off, add about 3 liters of water depending on the graph results from previous batches, mix, test, and send. This resulted in a mix that was near center spec every time. Until important manager with a degree watched me do a mix and started ranting, "You didn't measure, you're adding too much water, you should never add water unless the mix was out of spec. There's too much water, you're going to ruin the mix, only add water when it's out of spec, follow the procedure." I asked if he was really asking me to add 9 liters of water every 3rd tank instead of 3 liters every tank. He confirmed. I told him that this increased the risk of running dry and causing a batch of defects. He said, "I'll take that risk, but you better not sandbag." It turns out that the people who run the process can make it run fine, either thick or thin, but not when it changes from thick to thin every hour or two, then ramps back to thick. It also turns out that if something goes even slightly wrong on the previous shift, they may not leave you 40 minutes of mix time and 10 minutes of measurement time before the previous tank goes dry. Edit. Manager was judged on parts produced and defect rate. Both were bad until we could go back to the old way. The good news was that we were able to get a version of the smart way adopted as official. We were now allowed to control the process using statistics, just like we were taught in our mandatory statistical process control training. The next one is an entitled people story. This happened less than an hour ago, and it was both funny and completely ridiculous. For context, I am a 26-year-old woman. The setting was an authentic family-run Italian restaurant where I went with my parents on Saturday night to celebrate their wedding anniversary. The restaurant is in a small town, but it is award-winning, extremely busy, and serves incredible food. The staff are wonderful too. My mother also thinks one of the waiters or chefs has a crush on me. Apparently, he always says hello to her, and when we once walked toward the bathroom near the kitchen where he was working, he smiled at my mother and then looked behind her as if he was searching for me. I was not paying attention, but she noticed. We have been to this restaurant several times for birthdays and family meals and have never had a bad experience. My parents have also gone there by themselves, and the staff know them well enough to remember how my mother likes her wine. My father jokes around with some of the waiters, and the staff are always polite and helpful. Because the restaurant gets so busy, customers are told to arrive around 10 minutes before their reservation. Now to the story. We had a table booked for 5:30 p.m. The waitress explained that we had the table for 90 minutes until 7 o'clock p.m. That was no problem. It seemed like plenty of time. The restaurant was packed because it was a Saturday evening. We enjoyed our food and drinks, but there were a few small delays because of how busy everything was. That included our final specialty coffees and the last glass of my wine. While we were finishing, the next party assigned to our table arrived. There were 2 women and 2 men, and they had arrived later than they should have. At that point, several other groups were also waiting for tables. One of the women, the entitled woman in this story, immediately started glaring at my mother. She made comments about how they should be there, meaning at our table, and also kept staring at an empty table behind us. We were not sure which table was actually meant for them, but we only had around 5 minutes left and were finishing our drinks. One member of their party even tried to sit down at the empty table without being shown there by a waiter. Her husband stopped her and called her back to wait. When the waitress returned and spoke to us, we stood up so the staff could clear our table. We moved toward the bar to finish our drinks near the other waiting customers, including the entitled woman and her group. My mother had noticed both women glaring at her and simply looked back. My mother is a good person, but she is not someone you should push around. She also apologized to the waitress because we had been uncertain about exactly when we were expected to leave the table. She explained that we had not been deliberately slow. The bartender had taken longer to prepare the drinks because the restaurant was so busy. The waitress was completely understanding and thanked us for moving after we had paid. We collected our coats and walked toward the bar with our drinks. That was when the entitled woman started. In a sarcastic tone, she said, "I'm sorry you had to get up and move for us." She was also standing unusually close to my mother, and my mother does not handle people invading her personal space well. My mother replied, "It's okay, thank you," then turned away and stepped closer to the bar to finish her drink. The woman refused to leave her alone. She kept talking loudly and moved even closer, nearly touching my mother despite my mother repeatedly stepping away. Finally, my mother said firmly, "Go away." The woman gasped as if my mother had slapped her. The other woman gasped too and began looking around for people to support them. The entitled woman called my mother rude but still refused to leave her alone. My mother then said, "Please leave me alone." By now, the woman was creating a scene and continued repeating that my mother was rude. My mother tried to calm things down and said, "Look, I'm sorry if I came across as short, but I don't do well with people getting in my face like this." Several customers and staff members were watching. The bartender looked apologetic toward my mother but was too busy to intervene. Having worked in restaurants myself, I understood that he might have risked being dragged into the argument or having something nasty said to him. A young couple sitting in a booth near the bar were also watching. The entitled woman and her companion had earlier sat at their booth without permission, treating it like a waiting area even though it belonged to that couple. The woman still refused to back off. When my mother explained that it was her wedding anniversary and that she had only come there to enjoy a meal, the woman sarcastically said, "Happy anniversary," while continuing to call her rude. By that point, the other woman and one of the men had backed away. The other man, whom I assumed was the entitled woman's husband, looked embarrassed. Eventually, my mother told her to leave her alone or she would be cursed. For context, my mother jokes that centuries ago she probably would have been burned as a witch because she knows a lot about herbal remedies and similar things. The entitled woman gasped dramatically, called my mother a witch, and finally walked away. My mother moved closer to the young couple in the booth and asked whether she had been in the wrong. The woman in the booth immediately said, "Absolutely not." She said the entitled woman had been awful, had stood right in my mother's face, and had also rudely sat at their table as though it were part of the waiting area. The couple apologized that it had happened and reassured my mother that the woman's behavior had been unacceptable. We finished our drinks and left. After we got home and changed, my mother called the restaurant to apologize for the incident. The kind bartender who answered told her she had absolutely nothing to apologize for. He also confirmed that the entitled woman and her party had arrived late. He said the staff knew my family would not behave rudely because we had visited many times, were always pleasant, and tipped well. He said he hoped the incident had not ruined my parents' anniversary and that they would return soon. My mother thanked him and ended the call. My father and I also told her she had not needed to apologize, but I understand why she did. I am proud of my mother. She has been through a lot, but she is still a kind person. So yes, screw rude, entitled people who believe the entire world should revolve around them, especially when they are late and clearly in the wrong, and please be kind to people who work in hospitality. Anyway, thank you for watching.